Hi everyone, welcome to our next webinar, Watching the Watchmen, Compliant or Secure. I'm here with our lovely panelists that I'll let introduce themselves quickly. Kava, do you want to go first?
Sure. Hi everyone, I'm Kava Cope-Lahuti. I'm a data protection consultant at GemTALK.
James?
Good morning, everybody. So I'm James Weston, one of the security consultants at GemServe, specializing in CNI, OT, and technical cybersecurity.
And Michelle?
Hi, I'm Michelle Griffey from Communisys, and I'm the Chief Risk Officer there, looking after all things risk, including security, data protection, and operational risk.
Great. And I'm Cecilia McLaren. I'm the Head of Public Sector at GemServe. So to start us off, what went wrong with the government's track and trace?
Sure. So this was a very interesting case. Essentially, rather than deploying the system as it's meant to be deployed in May, or then the government suggested June, unfortunately it's been dragged out, and we've now changed provider, and we're going with the Apple and Google model that's been used more widely on the continent. And essentially there is a risk angle to this, in that the government and particularly Department of Health recently outlined that they didn't actually conduct a data protection impact assessment on the system, which is obviously a risk assessment that you would take whenever a system raises particular risks around collecting personal information. And the government has also, and the health secretary in interviews, seem to suggest that they viewed it more as a tick box exercise, which obviously fits quite well with our narrative, because it's arguably the reason why they did, or the reason why they went into some issues, was because they didn't have that thought through process that a DPIO or risk assessment would provide, of allowing an organization to judge the risks and benefits, whether those are things such as the challenges, operational challenges around securing the collection of information from the populace, or even considering the challenges that might come from privacy, from the privacy community or industry, to such a solution. And arguably, if they had done that and considered that data protection impact assessment at an earlier stage, they wouldn't have had the fallout that would have led to them needing to change provider. So it's quite a good example, really, of where building in compliance from the start can help avoid risks at a later stage. I don't know if there's any other thoughts on that from the panel.
Yeah, so I've got a thought around that, and just touching on one of the things you mentioned there, and I think there's a feeling of haste and urgency with the track and so we take track and trace. We wanted to get it in quickly. We wanted it to be effective. It needed to work yesterday so we could start making up ground. And this kind of goes into that long-held sort of narrative that security is always done at the end. It's always an afterthought. It's always a bolt-on. And in this case, compliance is as well. We want the output. We want the product. We want the thing. We'll just do this, and it ends up being rushed. It ends up being done hastily, and actually it doesn't then give you the benefits of actually what it set out to do in the first place.
And then reputationally it has a massive impact, and as you say, it goes that so often happens from a business perspective, is the proposition you're looking at. So what it is you want to develop, for whatever reason, is, yeah, great, let's get this going. We think about security or we think about compliance at the end, then we have to bolt on or cobble together something to sort it out, and reputationally the thing doesn't work, or it's delayed. So how often do things get delayed because we haven't thought up front privacy by design, for example? So probably here, as you mentioned, Cover, is the data protection impact assessment, but was that system built with privacy in mind from the outset? You get to the end, you realize you haven't, and then you're faced with either a delay or additional cost of implementing the bolt-on, or, as in this case, we roll back to do something that actually has thought it through. But reputationally, it's a massive impact.
Just continuing that then, with, I suppose, this, do people understand what security does or what the process is? So in this case, you've got a big, huge project that's being sort of put together. Security is one facet of that. The whole point of the app is to be used, to have a process. There's still a disconnect between what we do digitally and security. They're not aligned. In the same way, health and safety is really baked into everything we do at work, at home. It is just baked in, it's intrinsically there. We still see technology and security as two different disciplines, rather than it just being technology. or security. They don't interlink. So you have people who are making decisions who don't get security. Security can be bought at the end, it can be plugged on, done, we can make it secure, or we'll do a check afterwards. So this goes back to that sort of influencing bit around it. How do you get people who aren't interested in security, who it's not their day job to be interested in security? How do you get them to recognize that in a way where they don't become an expert, because they don't need to be, but they recognize when they need to introduce these conversations in?
I guess it's bringing it to life for people, isn't it? It's the way that you engage them, so you don't become the, oh god, it's the security team, they're just going to say no, or oh my goodness, we're going to have to jump through these loops in order to make sure we've done this right. It's about possibly coming back to that reputational bit. If you don't do it right, this thing isn't going to work, and you're not going to be able to use it properly for whatever it is. And in the worst case scenarios, you're going to cause some significant damage to people. If something is delayed, to an extent, so what? But if actually how you've built something leads to a really impactful data leak, or worse, as you mentioned, James, health and safety, you seriously injure someone, that's a whole lot worse, isn't it? And I guess it's actually trying to get across to people the difference between, oh, it's security, or oh, it's compliance, to actually, this means this to you. This means that you're going to be impacted.
But can I ask then, if you're running a project, I think if you were telling most people that you need to have compliance as part of this process on the start, people probably bulk at that idea thinking we'll never get it done because we need to operate like this. But is that actually a problem with the language that we use? Because security, you can make cybersecurity, that sounds a little bit exciting. But if you say the compliance team, that might just seem like a bit of a drag to have those part of your project from day one.
Yeah. So it'd be interesting to see what you guys think of this, but compliance and security are two sides of the same coin. But when you look at, say, media for the last 10, 15, 20 years now, whenever they've talked about cyber, they talk about hackers, and they talk about it's really interesting, it's engaging. It'd be very different if, rather than bringing the hacking team to do X, Y, and Z, you brought in the compliancy team. Like, it doesn't have the same ring to it. So I think in some ways, cybersecurity, the term cybersecurity is not represented of actually what real day-to-day security is. It's something which people, cybersecurity makes people think of red team exercises, of pen testing. It doesn't then look at the bits to secure something. It doesn't look at what needs to be done afterwards. It doesn't look at the incident response. It takes one segment which we've decided is really interesting because it's normally used in that connotation of action, really.
Yeah, I think that it's an interesting one, because if in reality, if you bring in your security team or your compliance team earlier on in the project and they feed into the requirements, actually you build something that is safe, secure, and you build it probably, or develop it in the time span you've got. If you bring them in at the end, inevitably you're now going, oh look, I've got to do another iteration of this, and oh look, we found this security gap, or we found this compliance problem. Right now we're going to have to do this before we follow it. But I think you're right, Celia, is how you engage to make people feel that is important up front. And to an extent, it needs to be in the process, but then people need to want to get it done and to do it.
Yeah, I mean, exactly the fact that it has to be built into design, but also no matter how well a system's designed, it still has to be operated and used on a day-to-day basis by people. And yeah, if you don't have the culture in place and you don't have the guidance that follows on from that, and that is monitored on an ongoing basis, there's always going to be a user error or an accident that exposes the back end or a vulnerability of a system. That could lead to a data breach, for example, or another accident, perhaps in a more in another context, health and safety, or for example.
I think if we want to go back to the topic of this webinar, being compliant doesn't actually necessarily mean that you are secure.
No, absolutely, and I think if you if we go sort of almost to the topic of ISOs, so 27001 as our example, then if you are organising your client compliance to get to 27001, it doesn't necessarily mean you're doing the right things. So on a personal level, I always prefer to say, well, let's do the right thing, and then the compliance follows, as opposed, or the 27001 compliance follows, as opposed to let's go out in order to get a standard, because you could potentially get a standard by having the processes in place, but no one's following them, and then you've got a false sense of security, and actually it is the false sense of security in the case of 27001, because you've got the picture on the wall, but actually are the people doing what they need to be doing, and is your organization or as secure as it should be?
So just on that then, I suppose the consequences of non-compliance in the sense of ISO are quite apparent, quite visible. That's the stick to get people to become, or sorry, to keep their compliancy there, is if we do not become compliant, we fail our assessment, we don't get recertified, we're now non-compliant. Okay, there's going to be a bit of an internal investigation about this. Why aren't we compliant? What's happened? We're going to lose customers potentially. We're going to lose reputation because of it. That we can qualify what not being compliant to ISO looks like to the business. We put a lot of our stock in the fact that we are ISO certified. Therefore, when people work with us, they have a expectation which we meet because they understand the common language. When you talk about not being secure, we tend to talk about abstractive. If you are not secure, you could have a data breach. Okay, we see that in the news all the time. What's the impact? What does that mean? How much does that actually cost the company? Well, 18 million. Based on what? Oh, this news article I found which said this company was fined 18 million. And it's very ethereal on one hand when you talk about security, but compliance is very almost binary. But it's what I suppose sits underneath the compliancy. So does anybody outside of security really know what somebody needs to do, or even outside of an ISO certification team know what goes into being ISO certified?
There's a question of whether they need to know as well. I mean, you may know Richard Thaler's and Cass Sunstein's book on nudges, where small architectural designs or behavioral economic designs that you can put into systems that influence behavior, but it's done in quite a nuanced way. So it's less draconian and less obvious than enforcing a policy. Perhaps things such as timing out key cards to enter buildings after 9 p.m. or even things such as having the password resets every 3 months or so could influence behavior in a way that you're not forcing individuals to read policies or abide by letter of the law compliance that could work in certain situations, particularly where there's less chance of individuals reading detailed guidance. I don't know if you've had any experience with that, Michelle.
But I think in a past life, I worked for an organisation and we did a review of policy, and there were thousands and thousands of pages of policy. And actually, are you therefore asking your people too much? Because ultimately, policy is what the company apparently is governing itself by. It's what we're all supposed to follow. We know we're supposed to follow policy, but if it would take me a whole year to read all the policy, I'm never going to follow it and I'm never going to understand it. And I think this is why it has to be, in order to make it work, and particularly in today's world, to James's point, where things become ethereal because it's all digital, I think this is why we do have to start changing the way we think about things, and perhaps looking away from pure compliance and starting to look for how do you actually check that you are protecting what you want to protect, so that you are actually saying, well, I do believe I'm secure because I've tested this and I've gone out and I've checked what people's attitudes are, and I've asked a few questions, and everybody actually keeps saying to me, oh no, gosh, let's take tailgating. No, I mustn't tailgate. So they haven't had to read the policy to necessarily do that and understand that, but it's worked its way in. So I guess some of this has to be drip feeding and consistent messaging to say this is what it's about. And to James's point, a data breach, so what? How do we get across the impact? Even if it's in the news, it's, oh, gosh, someone's been hacked. Well, what does that mean? And you don't start to see that, do you, until you see people in the news. So examples of people with the TravelX one. I can't get my holiday money, and I know we're going back pre-COVID and pre-lockdown there, where people were still going off on holiday, but I can't get my holiday money means something to me, and therefore suddenly it's important that that company was secure, but you only find out post the event, and therefore people are only seeing it post the event. And I wonder how we actually change that, probably to James, how we change that to make sure people, how do you start to get people to think about it pre the event?
So I don't know if I've got an answer necessary to that, but what I was going to throw out there was just linking into that is, you look what's happened with COVID. We've had this global pandemic, which nobody saw coming this time last year. But whenever we talked about, our internal incident response plans at businesses, we've got plans, we know what to do, but it's that sort of Murphy's law that, until a plan is tested, you don't know. And what the COVID pandemic has done is it's meant people have had to test their response plans. Unfortunately, some companies haven't weathered that. Others have done okay. But if we take that and apply that to security, it was only going through that event where it was really personal to us as a company, as a community community nationally, and as a company. But we still go, okay, actually, we realize the extent of the impact this has. Actually, if people can't travel to go to an office, how do we maintain our systems? If people can't go to client meetings, we can use team calls or Zoom calls. What happens if we can't use those? All of a sudden, the cracks start appearing because we planned for these sort of things, but we never really tested the extent of it.
I think there's a challenge there to sort of say, well, people had those plans, but sometimes were they too secure or too compliant? Because a number of people are like, oh, we can't use Zoom because it's not our network, and you end up getting stuck with certain systems. I think one of the things where I like us to think about is, why do we use these standards like ISO? And is that because actually when we design our own systems, sometimes we make them too complex to follow, and it assumes there's best practice humans that will just follow, even though it might, they might mean that you can't actually do your work.
So just on that then, I think when you look at, say, compliance and standards, they are a baseline level. So you look at, say, ISO, NIST, whatever a standard is, it is a baseline level that you achieve or you strive to achieve. But it's not a off-the-shelf, take it, apply it, ISO 27000, same for everybody. It needs to be made customized. It needs to be configured for your environment, your instance. And you have to really understand to your point, the business process. But we can't use Zoom because our security policy says we can't use Zoom. Actually, in this instance, we need to be able to go back, look at the policy, look at Zoom, do a very quick assessment of that, a security assessment, a compliance assessment, a usability assessment, go, actually, no, we can do, we've done our due diligence, move forward quickly. So that's my thoughts on this, but compliancy like that is a starting point which needs to be built upon. It's not an end goal.
And I think when we were in a very physical world, you could be much more structured, you could be much more almost dictatorial about what you did, because if you've got something in a filing cabinet, someone's physically got to break into an office to get it, to move it out, and so on. In this world, we have to be much more flexible. And I think to your point is the plans and the pandemic plans, and it's on the news at the moment, isn't it, about the sort of government pandemic plan? Well, actually, in reality, did any business have a pandemic plan that really, really was looking at an international global pandemic? Or actually, were we looking at something that, more like a business continuity plan where, I lose a site or I lose an area and I move it over here? And I think those people that have been able to take the baseline, to your point, James, and then flex it quickly and do a dynamic risk assessment or do a DPIA. We've introduced temperature checking on our sites now, and but we did do a DPIA, and we have checked what data is it holding, and we've tested that, and actually it isn't holding any data. But I think that's where you've got to start having that understanding of exactly what is it we're trying to protect here, what are we trying to do, and just keep going back to that, even though you've got the standards, because ultimately that baseline might have to flex in certain situations.
Yeah. Another good example on the same point is that something the GDPR, for example, and other privacy standards, is that you have the baseline, and it's also a point that I've been discussing with a few others recently, is these regulations that come out. Some of them are updated fairly frequently, like the ISO standards. Others, like the GDPR, and some others, in NIS directive, perhaps, that come out every 10 or 20 years. They're meant to try and be future-proof. They're meant to, more importantly, try and be technology-proof, and be effectively work more as a set of principles that can be applied to different situations and different evolving technologies. And so it's not meant to be a one-size-fits-all approach. It's meant to be a risk-based approach that organizations and particular industries develop themselves. And I think for GDPR, we've seen that with the online advertising industry developing its own self-regulatory approach and looking to the ICO and other bodies for endorsement of how it ensures consent for cookies online. There's other approaches that have come out, for example, with regard to managing children's consent, and there's often it's quite an industry specific or even self-regulatory layer that needs to be put on top of the baseline standard.
So just taking that, you've mentioned there about the NIS directive and GDPR, and I'll fall down a little bit more on the NIS, the Network Information Security Directive, and GDPR.
Sure.
But where I think they're different now, and where they reflect where we are in terms of our understanding of technology, our use of technology, is that, they're principle based. So if you take the NIS directive, it's around indicators of good practice. It's principle based. It's supposed to be a set of overriding principles that you take, that you internalize, you work with your competent authority to understand, actually, how do we meet this in a way which suits us? But it brings back conversation to before. It doesn't say this is what you need to do. It starts that. So GDPR, how many people now are aware of GDPR, are aware of data, not maybe what to do with it, what is secure, but it starts with that conversation where most people can say, I've heard of GDPR. I know it's to do with data. It's on my radar. Again, we're not going to crack this in a year or three. It's a huge thing. It's going to be constantly evolving. But I think things like GDPR and NIS directive have done more for compliance and security and whether to meet than a lot of other standards have done previously, because they've come along at a time where people actually understand the pitfalls of trying to apply standards to an organization.
Can we, we've got a question in, and I just think it'd be useful to use some real life examples of how do you, things like ISO, how do you avoid them becoming a tick box exercise or any standard? For example, how do you avoid GDPR from becoming just a policy on your website?
And I think this is, so it's so easy for compliance and let's take the ISOs to become a tick box exercise. And I think historically that has been, and part of that, I believe, is because of it. Historically, those teams that are responsible for maintaining them tend to be siloed. They tend to be central. They tend to push out, you have to do, and it's very, you will do this, you will do that, you will follow this standard. What you then get is in the wider organization, people effectively ticking the box to the question we've got to go, oh God, the central team are asking me to do this, I've got to do this, let's tick the box and send it back up. And that's where it fails, and that's where it stops working. So you actually have to start ensuring that, probably by drip feeding, probably to your point, Carver, but bit of nudge, but pushing that out there, getting people to actually understand why they want to do this. And actually, if each part of the business understands, and again, language is so difficult here, because if we say the risks, everyone go, big yawn, oh, blow my neck, it's that team again, we don't want to talk about this. But if they actually understand that if I do that or I don't follow this process, the process is here for a reason. If I don't follow it, something bad's going to happen, whether that be from a health and safety perspective, someone gets injured, or whether it is the work's going to go out in the wrong way, and then the clients are going to leave. We're not going to have any customers anymore. We're not going to make any money, and ultimately at the back end of that, if I've got no customers, I don't have a job. If people start to understand those rollout impacts, not only can they say, well, I understand why I'm doing this, and here's my reasoning, but also they can start to sort of feed back up why the ISO is wrong. And I think we have to move away. Or the ISO isn't necessarily wrong; it is the standard and the baseline. But I think we have to move away from that that sort of tick box. Oh yes, we're complying. To actually asking people, how do you do this? So if it is the standard, how is it that you, in your part of the organisation, meet this? What do you do? What does your process look like? Talk me through that, and then bring in more assurance rather than pure compliance.
Yeah, I think one thing that does work well in organizations is also, and I think it's a point you touched on, Michelle, is to have that devolved governance. So this is something, whether it's security or privacy or other spheres, works very well in terms of empowering staff, in terms of making them risk owners. Although perhaps we would probably debate between us, and feel free to challenge me whether you think the risk should sit with the department that owns the system, or whether it would still stay with the CISO or DPO. And that's probably a bit more contentious. But obviously, what isn't is giving the empowerment and making each making each member of staff or department manager aware of when they're using X or Y system, what initial risk assessment they need to do, or even just to flag to the DPO. I mean, taking ISO 27001 as an example, a lot of the procedures in an ISMS system can seem quite bland, and in themselves will probably not satisfy an auditor if you just put together a routine data breach management policy or incident management policy without having any substance to it, without testing it in practice, without having a triaging system, identifying which staff will work together if there's an incident, testing it, keeping a log showing that it actually works, putting up posters to make sure people know and diagnose what classifies as an incident. There's all sorts of procedural things, operational things that can fit around having a policy. And like I said, it's if you just follow the letter of the requirements, that probably won't satisfy an auditor, let alone protect you or keep you secure if an incident does actually happen.
So just on that then, what you touch on, so you touch on the auditor bit, but actually just by approaching it as a tick box exercise, you won't meet your auditor's requirements. I would then say that actually the auditor process, that's a tick box in itself. So when an auditor comes in, so the company suddenly goes into high alert, you're running around telling everybody, okay, don't not lock your computer when you go away, and don't leave anything on a printer. And the auditor walks around, and they've got to be accompanied by a member of the security team or whoever it is, because you can't let them roam on their own. So you can direct them around the building. So I would say that is still a tick. That's still the mentality is tick box. And what I would say that, when you sort of reflecting on the question which was put forward, is how do we stop it being a tick box? For me, it comes down to just challenge. It comes down to challenge it. Or if you feel that actually, we're going through this and we are treating it as a tick box, and actually I can see where even if we do this, we're still not compliant. Sorry, we're still not going to be secure. We've still got an issue. Then show that traceability. Go down the route of maybe even say doing a tabletop exercise with people, bringing different stakeholders, show them the consequences. And that really then becomes, even as going to a direct level and go, half an hour of your time, this is what we do at the moment, but look, all this can still happen, and here is what we need to do. Again, use it as that baseline for sure, but tailor it. And again, for me, it would be constantly challenging. It's at a point now where it's mature enough, but we should be challenging it.
Absolutely.
I think on challenging it, one of my favorite things is if we look at things that were meant with all the best intentions in terms of compliance and policies, that has exactly the opposite effects. I think Michelle and I both come from similar background in terms of industry, where we've seen a few of those as, policy has changed into regulation, and the risk appetite has somewhere gotten lost in the time. I would love to hear some of your, let's not name and shame, but some of our best examples where when people actually get it wrong in terms of putting in the wrong process for the wrong company.
Just trying. I'm trying to think. I'm sure there are some good examples there, but I think I think I can only think of examples that are not in the workplace. But I think in terms of compliance. But I think if you have to look at as well the again, what people are writing and what they're saying. So if a policy says the purpose of this is to make sure we get ISO 27001, then actually that's wrong. It's not, that isn't the policy, the reason for it. The purpose is to protect whatever we're trying to do, isn't it? And I think that's where things start to go wrong. And I suppose, Cecilia, you get, particularly historically in this sort of, we've centralised, the governance sits here, we're the compliance team or whatever it is, and you get this situation where people don't follow the ISMS, for example, and then you found out they haven't done something, and there historically there's a bit of a, oh well, they should have done, until you start asking, well, actually, did they know they should have done it? Well, it's in the standard. Well, okay, have they got the standard? Oh no, the standard's in that drive over there, and I wrote it because I'm very, very clever, but I've hidden it over there, and actually no one can see it, and yet we're still expecting them to follow it. So I think that's where it can go wrong, is if your compliance teams or your governance teams write the policies, write the standards, write the documents in order to get the ISO or whatever it is, get the box ticked, get the plaque above the wall, and then they hide it so that people actually don't know what they're supposed to follow.
Well, I've sat in meetings with very competent risk teams, but where in essence the opinion of that person is at that time, well, my job would be very easy if people weren't constantly doing business.
yeah. And then people don't seem to, and there's a lot of, I think, again, historically, a lot of sort of pure risk people in the past have probably been very much, well, this is all about the theory and we've got to do this. But actually in today's world, there's got to be an element of pragmatism in it, and it's got to work for whatever organization, because you're right, it's not about, oh, this would be so much easier if we didn't have customers. Yeah, of course it would, but actually they're paying your wages. And actually the most important people are the people that are doing whatever the work is to produce whatever the outcome is for the customer or client. They're the guys that you're there to support and protect and stop bad things happening for. So I think it's flipping it on its head, isn't it? But you're absolutely right.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to focus on, the reputational or the customer safety aspects of compliance can help, with winning hearts and minds.
So sorry, Cover. What I was going to say was, the topic of this for us is debating around or talking around compliancy and security. And the more we're talking about this, it's coming back to the fact that I think both the terms compliancy and security are starting to become outdated now, in terms of, it's not compliance versus security. It is that both of them have connotations which provide the public, for the workforce, our staff, when somebody goes, we need to be compliant, we go, oh God. Or we go, you need to talk to the security team. Oh, they're going to say we can't do this. We need a bit of a refresh in terms of security was great when it was a case of secure everything, lock it down, make it secure, because we're dealing with variables we can control. We're no longer dealing with variables we can control all the time. So actually we need to be moving towards this idea of, and another buzzword is resiliency at the moment. And resiliency needs to encompass the fact that here's your compliancy standards. This gets you this far. Then you've got your technical security or technical assurance, which gets you this far. And you've got the resiliency. Well, this is the people bit. This is having the right plans, the right people, and even having people who are maybe a little bit innovative. That actually, when it all goes a bit wrong, you've got somebody who can jump on it and go, actually, we need to do this now. Just trust me. Like, this will make it do this, and we can do da 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 da. Whereas security is very much a case of, this is a security incident, we respond to just the technical aspects or just this slice of it. And I think compliancy has the same effect, I think, in businesses now.
Yeah. Another interesting thought that I was having was, and I'm not sure how much you've seen these being used, but definitely in the data protection sphere, they're now being more common, is platforms or RegTech technologies that can help or attempt to help automate compliance. So basically, you have a software platform that has a list of requirements, whether it's ISO 27001, 27701, or GDPR, or even PCI elements that that essentially takes or attempts to take a load of work off the compliance team by sending them out to managers, allowing them to check through, see what they're to see if they meet the requirements. and then essentially that's kept separately. So that's kept centrally as an audit log that the assessment's been done, and then you would have the compliance professionals renew that and follow up as needed. I mean, there's two views to this. Obviously, from maybe as we can see, as we have discussed, as simply let's say making it more of a checkbox exercise than it actually is. You could also see it as decentralizing more. So in terms of putting more ownership on managers for themselves to become aware of the standards, and also saving time for compliance specialists. And then one argument could be, well, as long as in the end you've got a human in the loop, so to say, you've got a compliance manager that reviews all of that. You don't have a completely automated system that just becomes a tick box exercise. I don't know if and you have any other thoughts on those sort of technologies, systems.
Yeah, I think perhaps controversially, I think they exacerbate the problem of the tick box exercise, because I think what you're doing is you're saying that you're giving the manager, the member of staff, or the person that's not in the compliance team or the risk team, you're empowering them to do it. What are you empowering them to do? You're empowering them to fill in a questionnaire that they send back to you. Great. So you've ticked your box, you've done your compliance. Brilliant. I think what you actually have to do is and to your point earlier, Carver, about does the risk of a system failure sit with the CISO, or does it sit with the business? It sits with the business, because ultimately they are the people that are going to be impacted. If that system falls over and they can't serve their clients, it's going to be that area that either the client walks away from, or that area that gets a penalty, whatever it is. And therefore we're going to stop making money. The business is not going to be resilient anymore. We're not going to be able to maintain ourselves.
Yeah,
I think
there
we
is
got a good question on that, which is, do we make things too complicated? I welcome examples of when things are made too complicated, or I can give some myself where I've found a system that is so secure that actually your only way of being compliant is to not do your job, or, as most people end up doing, finding a shortcut around it.
So just on that, before we jump into that one there, what I want to link into Carver's on, which I think links into that bit, is abstraction. That by, say, going down that path, putting these tools in place, we're giving managers, they go through this process, and we're giving them a responsibility from it. We are getting away not from the layers of abstraction between us and not the security, but us and the business process, us and the technology. And then you come into complexity. The idea that we are dealing with hugely computers are layers and layers of simplicity, which when they stack up together become complex. And that's what we're doing by everything that we put in place, whether it's trying to explain security awareness to our staff. We make it really complex sometimes, unintentionally so, because we need to give them all the information, or we don't need to give it enough. And actually, we need to be focusing on just understanding, first of all, small steps. What do they need to know today, next week, and do it and have a thought out plan. But the more things we put in place between us and the business process, us and the technology, whether it's systems, policies, documents, that I think is where we see this complexity start to creep in.
And I think this is really important, why we can't be a them and us, because we're all part of the one organization, aren't we? And I know years ago I was developing a tool for product development. So I was looking after product governance in a major bank, and we were developing a tool to help the divisions to bring products in and say, yes, we can sign that off, or we can't sign it off. Well, actually, I went out and spoke to the divisions, and the divisions were sort of, oh my God, we've never seen anyone from the risk team come and talk to us before. So I think this is it, isn't it? You've got to immerse yourself in that in order to understand the difficulties that are faced by the business, in order to be able to give a process that is simple enough, hasn't got the complexity, and people aren't going to try and get around because, oh God, they've made this so complex. How do I avoid this? How do I get around it? It has to be digestible. And to the question we've got, you have to be able to put it in a way that people can understand. And no disrespect to anybody, in the current company that I now work in, when we were implementing our incident management process, which actually works very well, one of the GMs on one of our sites came along, was like, oh God, this has got to be simple. My guys like pictures. Okay, so they like pictures. So let's not give them a process. So we developed big posters. Great, we can print our own posters. That's fantastic. Big posters to go on the wall that were basically a pyramid, which took you down in the instant process from the P1, which is, oh my God, the world's falling down around our ears, to the P4, which is, yeah, you can deal with this. It's relatively low level. One of your printers has gone down, whatever it is. But on that poster, we also put, well, at this level, you need your manager. At this level, you need an instant manager from the risk team. At this level, actually, my God, the world is falling down, and now we bring in the CEO and the whole of the board. And you make it pictorial, and those, yeah, they're still out there on the walls, and actually they work pretty well. But giving somebody a 200-page, here's your incident management procedures document, whoever you are that's running a big printing machine, oh my God, the printing machine's gone wrong. Where do I find it in this document? It's not going to work. So yeah, we've got to make it relatable.
I think there's an interesting human aspect that I don't see as often when I look at, because you actually have what happens if something goes wrong. And there seems to often be, okay, we avoid those problems, but I think there needs to be where you end up getting around, sort of people going around the problem, is when you haven't given people the space to, if I accidentally breach this policy, what do I do?
Yeah. And so if you accidentally breach it or you make a mistake, we all do. So, as long as the most important thing is at that point that people put their hands up and go, oh my God, I've done something I shouldn't have done. It's gone wrong, because then you can deal with it. And I think our response to that has to be right as well. We can't run around shouting and screaming. We have to run around saying, okay, you realise that's gone wrong. What do we do about it?
So 2 points there. One is that is the accessibility. Now, how often does risk or security, how often does it get a personal face in a company? And it's very rare. Whereas health and safety, you'll often see pictures, posters up. It's visual. There'll be somebody from a company on the picture smiling and thumbs up, and it's all safe. But it's accessible, it's relatable. And as you said, there's principles, really easy to digest. Because if there's a health and safety issue, we can't have people thumbing through a document to try and work out what to do. They need to go, you look at, was it CPR? Is it ABC?
Yeah, airway.
Yeah, let's not. Yeah. ABC. There we go.
Yeah, that's the one.
But it's simple, but we know it. So all we need to do, if something ever comes up and we're in that situation, we go, right, ABC, Google ABC CPR. Okay, I know what to do. I can take that information or that data, I can use it. And when we come to say security, we often write these policies which are, thou shalt not use a USB stick for the implication is this. See paragraph subsection. And somebody's going, it's not, I understand I'm not supposed to use that, but I don't understand why, how.
Yeah.
And it is boiling it down to making it accessible, making it personal, making it relatable. We've all been through sort of education where back in the early stage, it was very much around, you're taught there's a whiteboard, you write it down, you internalize it. Right through to university now, where you're encouraged to have a debate, to have a conversation, to go away and research it yourself, to get involved in it. And the way we teach people is different. We teach them, as you say, in pictures, visually, because actually people can understand that. They can then use that and apply that. Whereas giving somebody something in a document or making it overly complex, all it does is make the security team or the risk team or whoever it is, or the directors go, we've got one of these, tick. And it doesn't do, and that's fine at that level. They can have a tick box there, but it needs to be implementable and useful when it comes to an operational level.
So I know we're at 47 now. So I wanted to ask if there's any final comments you want to make before we wrap up.
I think sure, after you, James.
Sorry, Cav. The only thing I'll say is there's a place for compliance, there's a place for security. It all feeds in, and I think often we get too caught up in our field in the infighting. But security is more important than compliancy. Being compliant is a tick box exercise, where compliance go, well, we're being methodical, you're just reacting to everything. And I think we have to appreciate now, when we look at things like GDPR and the NIS directive, that we are going away from that. We're moving forward. And only thing I'll say is that when it comes to security teams and risk teams, they've got to be ready to challenge things, ready to go and dive into things, but actually accept the fact that things are changing and that it will progress and it will change, but it does take time.
And I think from my perspective, it's very much about as a risk team, and you know, we are looking at resilience, as you said now, James. As a risk team, we are here to help people understand what could go wrong, but ultimately it is for the business to decide if the benefits, so the opportunities on the flip side of that, are worth it, and to go into any scenario with your eyes open. And it's about knowing what scenario you're going into with your eyes open, and then having a plan in place that you can broadly follow should something go wrong.
Yeah, exactly. I would also just say, so to take a third approach, or a third line of consideration, is just if you have the governance in place and you have the organizational structures, empowerment, and devolved guidance, what we've seen from the regulators, particularly from with the ICO in cases that I've been involved, is they will judge that favorably. And even where there are changing standards and changing guidance that we're still seeing with privacy legislations almost on a monthly basis, if you've got the framework in place that will enable you to be dynamic and provide a good baseline, that will be considered favorably.
Yeah. With that, I want to say a big thank you to our panelists, Kava, James, and Michelle. This webinar is available to download for our website, and also accessible to people who didn't follow through afterwards. We're back in the office at GemServe now, which is great for people like me that managed to make their home network so secure that they can't access the internet at home at the moment. Don't do it like me. Be like these guys. I think the really good learning is that compliance is changing. And I like James's new word of compliancy, or compliancy, which as we look at the world, we are looking at a more human, and maybe that's what COVID has taught us, that we have to have a flexible and have a human consideration when we apply our policies and processes, and look at the balance between what is our actual risk appetite in this, and what happens when people, what happens if someone does something wrong, and what happens if we do that. So I want to give a big applause and thank you to our panelists. We're going to take a break from webinars over August, and I hope to see you all back in September, where we'll continue to offend people of all professions by questioning how they do their jobs. Thank you very much, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.